All right, UPSC aspirants, let's get real for a second. You're deep in prep mode, feeling good about food security in India, then boom, a question about hidden hunger pops up. Been there. Yeah, it's a tricky one, but that's why we're doing this deep dive today. We're going to break down this crucial issue, and trust me, you'll want this info for both mains and prelims.
You know, what's fascinating about this topic is that India, as we all know, produces a pretty significant amount of food, enough to feed its people, yet this hidden hunger persists. It really makes you question those straightforward narratives about food security that we often hear.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've all heard of hunger. We all know about malnutrition, but this hidden hunger, that's a whole other beast, right? It's almost like a silent epidemic going on.
Exactly. It's almost like this nutritional gap, but it doesn't always show outward signs. So you might be eating enough in terms of calories, but you're missing out on those essential micronutrients. And in this case, the ICRISAT study we're looking at really focuses on protein deficiency.
So let's get into this ICRISAT study, the International Crops Research Institute for the Semi-Arid Tropics. It's a pretty big deal, right? Especially for our listeners who are prepping for the UPSC.
Oh, absolutely. ICRISAT is a highly respected international organization. They focus on dryland agriculture, so their research carries a lot of weight. And in this study, they've uncovered some pretty critical insights.
Okay, so let's break down those key findings. What really jumps out, especially for someone who's got their eyes on that UPSC exam?
Well, one of the major findings is that in rural India, there's this heavy reliance on cereal-based diets. You know, rice and wheat, those are the staples. But the thing is, while they're great for calorie intake, they don't provide a complete protein profile. So people might be getting those calories, but their bodies are missing those crucial building blocks.
So it's not just about how much you're eating, but what you're eating. That's a pretty crucial point, especially when we start thinking about government policies, right? Like how they can address this.
Oh, absolutely. And this is where things get even more interesting. The ICRISAT study found that even though protein-rich foods are available, things like pulses, dairy, even livestock products, their consumption is surprisingly low.
So why is that? Is it just a matter of, personal preference, or are there other things going on?
Well, it's definitely multifaceted. Cultural preferences play a part for sure. In some cases, affordability can be a barrier. But there's also this lack of awareness about just how important a balanced diet is, the consequences in the long run of not having enough protein.
It's like having all the pieces you need for a good, healthy meal, but not knowing how to put it all together.
Right,
Okay.
you got it. It's like having all the ingredients but missing the recipe. And to add another layer, we have to consider the public distribution system, or PDS, as everyone probably knows it. It plays a huge role in making sure people have access to food, but in a way, it kind of reinforces that cereal-heavy diet.
Because the PDS, it mainly distributes rice and wheat, right? So it's tackling the calorie issue, which is huge, but it's not necessarily addressing that lack of micronutrients.
Right.
So we have this system that's doing good, but it might also be contributing to another problem at the same time. Now, wouldn't that be something interesting to bring up in a mains answer?
It would. Analyzing unintended consequences of policies, even ones with good intentions, that's classic UPSC material right there. You could really dig into how the PDS is doing its job fighting hunger, but might be unintentionally making this hidden hunger problem worse.
That's a really good point. Okay, so let's talk about the impact of this protein deficiency. The study mentioned some pretty serious consequences, right?
Yeah, and this is where it gets concerning. When someone doesn't get enough protein for a long time, it can lead to muscle weakness. That affects everything, even simple daily tasks. And on top of that, it weakens the immune system, which makes people more susceptible to infections and illnesses.
And for kids, it's got to be even worse, right? Since
Sure
they're
it
still
does.
growing.
Definitely. Kids need that protein to develop properly. Not having enough can stunt their growth, not just physically, but mentally too. It can delay puberty and, in severe cases, lead to long-term developmental problems.
So that brings us to the big question, what can be done about this? The ICRISAT study makes some recommendations, and I think some of them are especially relevant for our UPSC folks listening.
One of the main ones is changing what the PDS offers, like adding more protein-rich foods to the mix, things like pulses, millets, even fortified foods. It could make a real difference in the nutritional quality of the food that's reaching the people who need it most.
But I imagine that's a huge logistical challenge, right? We're talking about a massive system here. How realistic is that kind of change?
Oh, it's a big undertaking, no doubt. And Thinking through those challenges, that's exactly the kind of critical thinking the UPSC examiners love to see. So yeah, there are hurdles, like figuring out how to procure, store, and distribute all these different foods. And then there's the cost factor. Can the government actually afford to do all that?
So it's more than just adding a few new items to the list. You have to consider the entire process, right? From start to finish.
Exactly. And we're just scratching the surface here. I mean, think about India's agricultural policies. They'd likely need to shift to encourage more production of pulses and millets, moving away from that heavy focus on rice and wheat. And storage, well, these protein-rich crops often need different storage conditions compared to rice and wheat.
So we're talking about a whole chain reaction, really.
Exactly. And then there's the distribution piece. Getting this more diverse food basket to remote areas, that's going to be a logistical puzzle in itself.
Wow, so just that one recommendation opens up a whole can of worms, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that's what makes this such a great topic to study for the UPSC, right? It's complex, it's multi-layered, there's so many things to consider.
Absolutely. It's perfect for those aiming for top ranks. And keep in mind, this diversification of the PDS, it's just one of the recommendations that ICRISAT puts forward. They also talk a lot about nutrition education, empowering women, and promoting sustainable farming practices. All of these things are connected to different aspects of governance and policy, which, is huge for the UPSC.
And that's what makes this so interesting, right? It's not just about food. It's about how all these different aspects of society and governance are connected. It's like a perfect example of how the UPSC syllabus brings all these seemingly different subjects together.
You hit the nail on the head, and that's really why we're doing this, to help you understand how these complex issues all connect and give you the knowledge you need to really excel in your UPSC journey.
Exactly. We've covered a lot in this first segment, but we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore. We'll be diving into those other recommendations and looking at their impact on policy and governance after the break.
And we'll be talking about those fascinating regional differences in protein consumption that the study highlighted. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back in just a bit.
And for those of you who are eager to learn more, you should definitely check out Down to Earth. Today's insights are from them, and they have some really great articles that go into even more depth on this topic. It's a fantastic resource for keeping up with all things environment and development.
And Down to Earth is a must-read, I'd say. Okay, we'll be right back.
So before we went to, earlier we were talking about the PDS and how changing what they offer could help, but there are definitely some big hurdles there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. For anyone studying for the UPSC, it's tempting to just suggest easy solutions, but when you look at what's really happening, it's way more complicated.
Absolutely. And the ICRISAT study shows that by pointing out how much protein consumption varies across different regions of India, it's not the same everywhere.
So it's not just a national problem, it's different in each state.
Exactly. For example, the study found that states like Bihar, Jharkhand, and Uttar Pradesh, their protein intake is especially low, while other states are doing a bit better.
That makes sense, I guess. Different regions have their own traditional diets and ways of farming. But for our UPSC listeners, how could they use this info in the exam?
Imagine a mains question about how effective national nutrition programs are. You could bring up these regional differences to argue for a more decentralized approach, right? Give states more freedom to create programs that fit their specific needs.
Instead of just one solution for the whole country, you're suggesting something more tailored. I like that.
Exactly. And you could even use the data from the ICRISAT study to support your point, showing that you understand the research and how it applies to real-life policymaking. That's what makes a great answer stand out.
Speaking of applying research, let's get into some of ICRISAT's other suggestions. We talked about nutrition education a bit earlier, but how would that actually help with hidden hunger?
Education is key, for sure. Imagine incorporating nutrition education into school curriculums, running public health campaigns, having awareness programs in communities. All those things could help change what people eat and bust some myths about protein.
It's about giving people the information and the tools they need to make good choices for their health, right?
Exactly. It's about empowering people. And this whole idea of social capital, how it helps development, that's something that comes up a lot in the UPSC syllabus.
Okay, so we've talked about the PDS and education, but what else can we do? What other options are out there to tackle this hidden hunger issue?
ICRISAT is really big on empowering women. They suggest investing in women's education and making those self-help groups even stronger.
That makes a lot of sense. Women are usually the ones preparing the food and making decisions about meals in their families.
Right. If you educate women about nutrition, they can use that knowledge to make their whole family healthier.
It's like a domino effect leading to a lot of positive changes. And I read that fits well with the UPSC's focus on gender equality and women's empowerment, right?
Absolutely. It shows how things that seem unrelated, like nutrition and gender equality, are actually connected. That's a really valuable insight for anyone taking the UPSC.
Another thing that stood out to me was their suggestion about promoting different and sustainable farming practices. How does that connect to the fight against hidden hunger?
It's about going to the root of the problem. We need to move away from monoculture farming, which just focuses on those main cereals. We should be encouraging farmers to grow a bigger variety of crops, especially the ones that are packed with protein like pulses and millets.
So it's not just growing more food, it's growing the right kinds of food.
Exactly. And we have to do it in a way that doesn't hurt our natural resources or damage the environment. Think about things like crop rotation, organic farming, and conserving water.
Which ties in perfectly with sustainable development, right? A big topic in the UPSC syllabus.
Absolutely. The UPSC examiners are looking for people who understand how different issues are connected, who can think about solutions in a holistic way.
So it's not enough to just say, let's grow more pulses. You need to think about the whole system. The farmers, the environment, the people who eat the food, and the policies that affect it all.
Right. It's about seeing the whole picture. And to tackle a complex problem like hidden hunger, you need a multifaceted approach, attacking it from different angles.
Before we move on, I wanted to mention something that's been on my mind. We've been mostly talking about rural India, but what about cities? Could hidden hunger be a problem there too?
That's a great question, and it's something ICRISAT acknowledges in their study. Their main focus was on rural areas, but they do point out that more research is needed on hidden hunger in urban settings.
Because even though we usually think of hunger and malnutrition as problems in rural areas, there might be other things causing nutritional deficiencies in cities.
Exactly. Think about what people in cities tend to eat. There's a lot of processed food readily available, the lifestyle is fast-paced, and sometimes even fresh, affordable produce can be hard to find. All those things could lead to hidden hunger.
So it's not just about how much money people have, it's also about whether they can actually get nutritious food and whether they know enough to make healthy choices.
That's it. And this brings up another interesting thought for UPSC aspirants. How would the solutions we've talked about need to change to work in cities? Could urban farming help? How can we encourage healthy eating in a fast-paced environment?
So maybe the problem of hidden hunger is similar, but the way we approach it needs to be different depending on the setting.
Exactly. And that's what's so great about the UPSC exam. It makes you think critically, analyze complicated situations, and come up with solutions that are not only effective but also relevant to the specific context.
This has been a really insightful conversation. We've gone from the ICRISAT study's findings to potential policy changes and the differences in protein consumption across different parts of the country.
And we've also talked about how important education, women's empowerment, and sustainable farming practices are in tackling this problem.
It really makes you think, we talk about food security, but it's usually in this general way. But when you understand these little details about hidden hunger, it adds this whole new layer to the issue.
Yeah, it definitely does. And for those preparing for the UPSC, I think this deep dive gives them a ton of material to work with. They can analyze government policies, critique what's already being done, even suggest new and innovative solutions in their answers.
Exactly. And remember, the UPSC isn't just about what you know. It's about showing that you can think analytically, that you can apply what you've learned to real-world situations.
Right. And it's always good to cite reliable sources. Like today's insights came from Down to Earth. They have some really great articles that explore this topic even further. And mentioning those kinds of sources in your mains answers gives your arguments more weight.
For sure. Down to Earth is an excellent resource for anyone who's interested in these environmental and developmental issues. I highly recommend it.
Before we wrap things up, I want to leave you with something to think about. We've talked about rural India, we touched on urban areas, but what about technology? Could there be tech solutions for hidden hunger, maybe using food fortification or precision agriculture?
That's a really interesting point. Could technology help us close that nutritional gap more efficiently, more effectively? Something to consider as you continue your UPSC journey.
Absolutely. And always remember, the UPSC exam is all about making connections, seeing the big picture, and coming up with those innovative solutions. So keep those analytical minds working.
And if you want more deep dives into these crucial UPSC topics, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We're here to help you every step of the way.
I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below with any questions or anything you want to share.
That's it for today. Keep learning, keep asking those questions, and good luck on your UPSC journey.